Okay, today class we're going to talk about classifying quadrilaterals, and quadrilaterals are just a quadrilateral is a closed polygon with four sides. So it's just any polygon that has four sides that's connected. And today we want to talk about special quadrilaterals. We want to talk about parallelograms, rhombus, rectangle, squares. Of course, we're going to roll this down. And we're going to talk about kites, trapezoids, and isosceles trapezoids. I'm sure that you have heard of some of these and you've used them before in middle school, um, but we want to go a little bit deeper. Okay, so today we want to talk about parallelograms, and a parallelogram is a four-sided figure with two pairs of opposite sides parallel. So that means this side we would show with an arrow is parallel to this side, and that this side, the right side, is parallel to the left side. So opposite sides are parallel. Also, we know on parallelograms that opposite sides are congruent and opposite angles are also congruent. And with this base information, we can solve problems. And I'm going to show you that in a few minutes. First, we're going to go through the definitions. Okay, so we need to talk about a rhombus real quick, and that's going to be four congruent sides. If we talk, and it's a parallelogram, which means we still have opposite sides congruent and opposite sides parallel to each other. A rectangle is a parallelogram with opposite sides congruent and opposite sides parallel to each other. But the big definition is that it has right angles. Okay, and then we talk about a square is a combination of a rhombus and a rectangle. It's a parallelogram with opposite sides congruent. Let's change colors. Opposite sides are congruent. All sides are congruent, just like a rhombus. Four congruent sides and four right angles. Okay. And so the other quadrilaterals that we want to talk about is a kite. A kite has two pairs of adjacent sides that are congruent. So those two are congruent, and those two sides are congruent. And no opposite sides are congruent at all. They're adjacent sides, and this is the only one that we have that's like this. Now, trapezoid, whereas our parallelogram had two pair of parallel sides, the trapezoid only has one pair of parallel sides, parallel to each other. So it has one pair of parallel sides. Well, an isosceles trapezoid is a little more special. It also has your pair of sides that are parallel, but it has these two sides that are not parallel. They're congruent. The two sides that are not parallel are congruent. So, with the base knowledge that we've learned in the definitions, and that's basically what this lesson is about. Okay, we'll roll back up to our parallelogram. Now, we said that opposite sides are parallel. Well, opposite sides are also congruent. So that means this side is congruent to this side, and this side is congruent to this side. So if we say that the left-hand side is 5a plus 4, and we said that the right-hand side is 3a plus 8, then, and we know that they're congruent, then we can say that 5a plus 4 is equal to 3a plus 8. And we can solve this equation and have 2a plus 4 is equal to 8, where when we subtract 4 from both sides, 2a is equal to 4, and we divide by 2, so a is equal to 2. Now, if I ask you just to solve for a, this would be your answer. If I ask you to tell me what these sides were, You could plug the 2 back in, and you would find out that 5 times 2 plus 4 would be 10 plus 4. So those sides would be 14. Now you can see how you could do the same thing with a rhombus and a rectangle, because a rectangle would also have opposite sides congruent. So would a square. If we move down, let's move down to some that are a little more difficult. If we had a kite, if we said this kite was 2y plus 5, it's basically the same idea. It's just we have adjacent sides that are equal. Is the same thing as x plus 6, y plus 6. Then we would say 2y plus 5 is equal to y plus 6. So we would subtract y from both sides, and we'd say y plus 5 is equal to 6. And then we would say subtract 5 from both sides, and our final answer would be y is equal to 1. Now we could sub that back in, and we could find out what those sides are, or we could just say what is the variable. Looking at one more problem, what if we had an isosceles trapezoid? There are a couple other things that you need to know. Since it is isosceles, that's what's important. Remember our isosceles triangles, the base angles were congruent? Well, an isosceles trapezoid has 2 sets of base angles. So these 2 angles here are congruent, and these 2 angles are congruent. So if I told you that this angle right here was 2x plus 4, and I told you that this angle was 3x minus 5, and I asked you to solve for x, then you know the base angles are congruent because it is an isosceles trapezoid. Therefore, you would say that 2x plus 4 is equal to 3x minus 5. And you would solve this equation. I would subtract 3x from both sides, even though it gives me a negative x. And then I would subtract 4 from both sides. And so we have negative 1x is equal to negative 9. So when you solve this, you get x is equal to 9. Now, we could plug 9 in and find out what these angles are, or we could just solve for a variable. And that's your lesson.